Let me now turn to Paul Dudenheffer, who is teaching the workshop on writing. Paul Dudenheffer is an excellent teacher for this. He has been a professional writer and editor for over 25 years. He's currently the managing editor of Politics and Society, which is a quarterly academic journal published by Sage. And he's also a staff member of the Center for the History of Political Economy at Duke. So he spent a large portion of his career at Duke, and he's taught writing specifically to economics students. So he really knows, what the economics jargon entails and the challenges, particularly for scholarly writing in this field. And he has, written all over the place. He has feature stories for the website of the Center for the History of Political Economy, and for Just from the Mill, which is Duke's University Social Science Research magazine. So he's super skilled and equipped on this, and I'm excited to give him the floor. And just let's talk a little bit about this workshop and about the importance of writing. So Paul, what is good writing? Oh, we just want to unmute you. Still on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry, I know what happened. I was looking up a book on you can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. I was looking up, thank you for that wonderful introduction, by the way, Heska. I was looking up a book on another browser, and that's why. So sorry about that.
No worries.
So what is good writing? Well, I'm going to give you two answers to that question. So one thing that amazes me is that the PhD students that I've worked with, so professional economists have a very particular way of speaking about things and a very particular way of writing about things. And the way that they write about things, what's interesting to me is someone joins a PhD program and they're largely unfamiliar with the way economists write about economics and what they do. And what amazes me is after about 2 or 3 years, they sound just like they've been fully indoctrinated into the discourse community. And it's amazing how they sound just like I expect economists to sound. And that's not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. So good writing, here's the way that I want to answer this question. If you're thinking about becoming a professional economist, the first thing you need to do is just learn how to write like economists write in academic publications and so forth, which you will if you go through a PhD program. It seems to happen to everyone. And then then there's that component of writing like professional economists do. And then there are the standards of good writing more generally, which after you master the disciplinary specific traits of economics writing, I would encourage you to start mastering what counts as good writing in general, and then try to blend the two to just write pieces with a little more style that might reach a slightly bigger audience, and that might be more enjoyable for your fellow economists to read, more enjoyable than they might expect. So good writing, there's two levels to that. There's what counts as good writing for the discipline, and then there's what counts as good writing in general. And what I encourage people to do is learn how to write in the discipline, and then start learning how to write better in general, and then try to blend the two. And if you can do that, then you're really on your way.
Yeah, say more about what it helps us with, because I think a lot of the time the tendency or the temptation is to worry very much about our methodology, about our particular idea or hypothesis, and we think, okay, we're going to think this whole thing out, and then we just have to write it up later. But I've heard some writing teachers say that actually the process is a lot more intertwined, and writing is important from the very beginning of your work, or from the very start. Could you say a little bit about how writing and thinking go hand in hand, perhaps?
Yeah, well, they absolutely do. So what you've described first I'm going to do my research, then I'm going to write it up, is sort of the old-fashioned or default way of thinking about how an academic piece of writing gets put together, and a piece of writing in economics in particular gets put together. But really, writing is part of the discovery process. I mean, part of doing your research involves writing along the way, because as you write along the way, and you're inevitably going to have to do this, you can't separate the two, the research and the writing. In my view, they really are interrelated. And what I encourage people to do is to write as they research. And what often happens is as you write while you research, you start discovering new connections. You start coming up with new ways of looking at the problem that may not have occurred to you otherwise. But as I say, writing is thinking, thinking is writing. The two are interrelated. And if I can succeed in convincing the audience of any one thing, it's to not have that bifurcation of research on one side and writing on the other side, but instead to bring the two together.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit about your workshop. So if some people are listening and they think, okay, yeah, I could use a little help with my writing. You know, sometimes I'm staring at the screen and I feel stuck. Then once I get going, I'm okay, but I end up fussing over a sentence and it's all a bit of a drag. Is that something you can help them with?
Well, sure. I mean, I can talk in the workshop, I can talk about ways to, I call it getting unstuck, things that you can do to help what's known as fluency, getting words down on a page. We could certainly talk about that in the workshop if that's the kind of thing that people would like. But yeah, yeah. So I think of writing as a whole person activity, and that I if you're an economist, I want you to think of yourself as a writer. That's basically my bottom line message. Think of yourself as a writer. And when you start thinking of yourself as a writer, you're going to start thinking about writing in a whole different way. You're going to become attentive and attuned to writing lessons that you may not have noticed otherwise, and you're going to become more committed to improving yourself as a writer. I think it's very much a question of identity. It's very much thinking of yourself not just as an economist, but as someone who writes about economics.
That's very interesting. I haven't really heard that point made much before, but it is very powerful because ultimately, of course, we are not just in the business of coming up with ideas or about making, finding truths, but also communicating those and allowing them to go out in the world and make the difference that they are capable of making. So, I mean, I'm certainly excited to sneak my own way into the workshop, but to convince everybody else, maybe tell us a little bit more about the format and what somebody would expect from the workshop, because you mentioned that they can also bring a piece of writing that they're working on, correct?
Yeah. So the way that I see the workshop going right now is I will definitely talk about the things that are important to do in an academic economics paper. So, for example, one thing that you have to do is clearly communicate how what you're doing is not only different from what other people have done, but why that difference matters. So, we'll talk about things like that. We'll talk about the function of the introduction, which is sort of a mini version of the paper, but it's really where you make the case for your article. Um, and then we will also look at things you can do to help you write in a clearer style. And so I'm very much there's one book in particular that I just love, and it's the book that I teach from. And I can give you the title and the authors right now. It's called Style, Style, Lessons in Clarity and Grace. In fact, I will go ahead and just write that in the chat here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's see. Yeah. Sorry. It's called Style, Lessons in Clarity and Grace by Joseph Williams and Joseph Bizup. And to me, it's the best book out there for showing you how you can take a piece of your own writing and revise it so that it has the greatest chance of communicating what it is you want to communicate. So in the workshop, the way that I see it right now is we'll start by talking about what you need to do in an economics paper in order to get it published, the things you need to communicate in order to get it published. And then we'll talk about things you can do on the more sentence and paragraph level to improve the clarity of your writing.
Super. So the type of writing piece that people are encouraged to bring might actually be a paper that they've recently written, or a paper that they're, in the middle of, or a master's thesis that they are hoping to publish, or a PhD that they are fairly advanced in. Are all of those fair game?
Yeah, all of those are fair game. And when we talk about the things that you need to do the things that you need to do in an economics paper in order to get published, we can look at the paper as a whole, or I can have the writer look at the paper as a whole. And then when we talk about the principles in the Williams and Bizup book, what I'll ask people to do is take a particular paragraph, and then I'll have them work through that paragraph and
Okay.
and sort of evaluate it using the principles in Williams and Bizup.
Okay, fantastic. And just to hammer this home for everybody, you can already sign up for this workshop now. The link is in the chat. It's taking place on the 23rd of April, 10 a.m. Eastern time. If I remember correctly, that's a Saturday, and it's going to run for about 2.5 hours. So you're really going to have the chance to get some work done. You're going to go in, with one piece of writing and come out with a better piece of writing, I think. So
Yep.
I would really take advantage of it. And, people are already excited, I think, because they are asking you questions in the chat already. So, some of it might need to wait until the workshop, but maybe you can give them a tidbit in this last question. So I'm going to combine the two. Christian asks, would you say that the style of writing in economics that you talked about at the beginning, the sort of like formal style, is the same across countries and languages? And then somebody else asks, what about writing in which there's different authors from multidisciplinary backgrounds? What happens to the mixture of styles? So I guess both of them really ask about diversity in styles. Does that exist, or are we really all speaking the same economics language, if you will?
Yeah. Well, let me take the first question first, which was about is it the same across cultures? And it's probably not. I don't know the answer for that for sure. What I can say is that for better or worse, economics has become more and more standardized. And the major journals, what are considered to be the major journals in the field, are now all English language journals. And so there are I call it the Anglo-American style, but there are certain things that if you came up in the Anglo-American tradition, you learn as the characteristics of good writing. And so, as far as I know, different cultures certainly have different standards, and what counts as good writing and say one culture may not count as good writing in another culture. But what I can say, again, for better or worse, economics has become more and more standardized across the globe, and the major journals right now are English language journals, and they more and more they have more and more adopted what I think of as Anglo-American standards of good writing. Now, the other question about co-authorship, I mean, I don't really have an answer for that. I can say that, gosh, probably as recently as just 20 years ago, co-authored papers were not very common. Now they're becoming more and more common. And in fact, it's almost the exception now when it's not a co-authored paper. So co-authorship has become fairly standard now in the field. And how people divvy up the writing and the research really varies from one group of writers to the next group of writers. So, for example, there may be one writer who says, "I'm going to write the first draft, and then you all have a crack at it." Or they may say, "Well, I'm going to write the introduction, you write the methodology section, you write the model," that kind of thing. It really depends on how they want to work together.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we need to pause there and leave the rest for the workshop. So I just encourage everyone to find their way to the link and grab their seat. And I thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to speak with us today. And
You're very welcome, Jessica, and thank you all for attending, and I look forward to the workshop.